I can hardly believe the explosive secret I have carried within me for decades is about to be unleashed. An eyewitness account so vivid and startling that it shines an entirely new light on the historic arrest of Rosa Parks that fateful evening of December 1, 1955, when one courageous woman's quiet act of defiance shattered the oppressive norms of Montgomery, Alabama, and ignited a revolution in the fight for civil rights. But what most people don't know is that I, Margaret Louise Watson, was there, sitting in the seat directly behind Rosa, watching the drama unfold with my own eyes, hearing every whispered threat and protest, feeling the tension coil like a spring in the humid southern air, and clutching at my own heart as my breath became shallow, for I knew that something life-changing was about to happen. Something that would shake the foundations of a broken system. And though I kept my silence for so many years, haunted by fear and uncertainty, I now realize that history deserves the full truth, unabridged and unadulterated. So allow me to share every detail, every word spoken, and every gasp of horror, every triumphant surge of determination, so that you, dear reader, may finally see what truly transpired that night, and how the aftermath reverberated in ways never before revealed. Margaret, I can still hear my younger self whispering as my shaking hands clutched the handle of my worn purse. Calm down, just breathe. I was only 19 at the time, newly married to a kind-hearted but timid man named Russell, who worked as a night shift janitor at the local paper mill, and I had come from a modest background, raised on a farm not far from the city, where I had grown up hearing the stories of injustice but never truly understanding them until that night. I had decided to visit a friend on the other side of town that day, someone I had met at a local church event, a friend named Annie, who lived in a cramped apartment with her family. I spent the afternoon helping her cook supper for her younger siblings, and by the time the twilight enveloped Montgomery, I knew I had to get home before it got too dark. I boarded the Cleveland Avenue bus around 6 p.m., clutching my purse tightly, stepping carefully so my modest skirt wouldn't catch on the worn bus steps, and I saw a few people I recognized, none that I was close to, but enough to give a polite nod. There was Rosa Parks, whom I knew only vaguely from the local NAACP meetings that some of my older friends had mentioned, and I had heard her speak once or twice, a gentle but firm voice that carried conviction and warmth, a woman whose posture alone seemed to command dignity. She sat near the middle of the bus, neither up front nor completely in the back, where most black passengers were customarily expected to cluster, but somewhere in that uncertain territory that was always policed by the unwritten rules of race and custom. I remember thinking, she looks so calm, so composed, as though she carries an unspoken strength in her very bones. I took the seat behind her, not because I was brave enough to do so intentionally, but simply because all the other seats were filled, and as the bus lurched forward, I caught myself watching her reflection in the window, seeing her steady expression. It was around this point that I heard the bus driver, James Blake, a man whose reputation for cruelty and harsh enforcement of the segregation laws had spread far and wide, grumbling at the front of the bus, complaining about something in a tone that dripped venom. "I don't care who they are," I heard him snarl at a passenger who had asked a question I couldn't quite catch. "I'll make them move if I have to stop this bus right here in the middle of the road." His voice carried a bitterness that made my skin crawl, even though I was white and technically not the target of his wrath. I felt a wave of dread wash over me. Rosa herself must have felt that chill, for she exhaled quietly and set her gaze forward, hands cradling her purse in her lap as though it were a shield. The bus continued for a few more blocks, picking up more passengers at each stop, and soon the seats were full and the aisle began to fill with men and women standing, swaying with the motion. I recall a nervous hush falling over the passengers, a sense that something was about to erupt, for there were now several white passengers forced to stand, and James Blake was scanning the rows, eyes narrow, lips pursed. Then it happened. Blake pulled the bus to a sudden stop in front of the Empire Theater, turned around, and barked, "YLL better make some seats up here. Now, I need those in the front rows." His glare rested on the row where Rosa Parks sat, as well as the row opposite it. And though the words themselves have become iconic, how he ordered the black passengers to vacate their seats so the white passengers could sit there, were additional words that burned themselves into my memory that night. "This is your last warning," Blake spat, practically hissing at Rosa and the others. "I ain't got all day to wrestle with you people, so stand up and get to the back where you belong." I saw the other black passengers in that row. There were 2 men and a woman, each one wearing the exhaustion of a long day's work, rising slowly, heads bowed in resignation, exchanging glances of quiet despair, because they knew the routine, knew the consequences if they defied the driver's orders. But Rosa Parks did not move. Instead, she slid a bit closer to the window, as if to give one of them space to pass by. And at that moment, I remember my breath catching, heart hammering in my chest, because I could see the tension etched in her features, a quiet, resolute determination. "Ma'am, you better get up," Blake said, his voice wavering between fury and incredulity, as though he couldn't believe someone was daring to challenge him. Rosa turned her head slightly and locked eyes with him. In a voice calm but tinged with an unwavering firmness, she said, "No, I'm not moving from this seat." I saw Blake's face contort with rage, the cords in his neck tightening, the fury in his eyes blazing like a wildfire. He slammed the brake lever again and rose from his seat, his entire body trembling with indignation. "What did you say to me?" he demanded, each syllable practically dripping with menace. The bus had fallen so silent that I could hear my own pulse throbbing in my ears. Rosa swallowed, and her voice was steady, though I suspect her heart must have been pounding just as fiercely as mine. "I'm tired. I've worked hard all day, and my feet ache. I have every right to sit here just as much as anyone else. I paid for my ticket." Her words hung in the air like a declaration of independence, and I saw the expressions of the passengers around her, some stunned, some fearful, some flickering with a faint glimmer of admiration. Meanwhile, James Blake looked like he had been personally attacked by her refusal. "You heard me," he growled, looking around for support from the white passengers. A few nodded, urging him on, spitting out hateful remarks under their breath, demanding that he do something. One older white woman across the aisle, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, hissed, "I can't believe this. How dare she?" While a man who smelled of tobacco stepped forward, shouting, "Driver, if she won't move, call the police." My heart jumped at that, and I clenched my purse so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Rosa took a deep breath, and though her expression wavered just a moment, perhaps revealing a flicker of fear, she lifted her chin and repeated, "I'm not moving." In the seat beside her, a younger black woman who had just relinquished her seat before Rosa's declaration looked at her with wide eyes and whispered, "Rosa, please, just come on. I don't want to see you get hurt." But Rosa only reached out to gently squeeze the woman's hand. "Sometimes, dear, we can't keep giving in." Their eyes met in a moment of solidarity that nearly brought tears to my own eyes. For I witnessed then the solidarity of 2 souls caught in an oppressive system, forging a bond through defiance. In that moment, I felt a strange, powerful rush of empathy that made me want to stand up myself and shout, "Leave her be. She's not hurting anyone." But fear pinned me to my seat, fear of retribution, fear of the consequences in a place like Montgomery. So I remained silent, trembling, inwardly torn apart by guilt, yet too petrified to act. James Blake stomped back to the front of the bus. "I'm calling the police," he declared, yanking on his collar as though it were choking him. He grabbed a small radio receiver, but realized after cursing under his breath that he would have to leave the bus to find a phone. He turned back to Rosa. "You just stay right there, lady, and we'll see how tough you are when the police get here." Rosa said nothing, only returned her gaze to the street outside, watching the headlights of passing cars glint off the dark pavement. The tension in the bus was suffocating. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others craned their necks to watch Rosa's unmoving figure. I could hear muted whispers. One man near the back was muttering, "Why she gotta stir up so much trouble?" "We all pay the price when someone acts up like this." Another woman near me, who happened to be white, lowered her eyes and shook her head, whispering, "This is just shameful, making a scene." My heart ached because I knew they did not understand that Rosa Parks was not making a scene. She was simply demanding human dignity. In the hush, I leaned forward and dared to touch Rosa's shoulder ever so gently. She glanced back at me, and for a moment, our eyes met. I could see the pain in hers, and perhaps she saw the trembling remorse in mine, or she attempted a small, reassuring smile. "It's all right," she said softly, as though reading my mind. "I know you're scared. A lot of us are scared. But maybe one day we won't be." That moment, that single glance, is forever seared into my memory. I nodded, unable to form words. Within minutes, James Blake emerged once more, furious, pointing a finger at Rosa. "You're under arrest," he snapped. Though the actual police officers had not yet arrived, he glared around the bus as though daring anyone to object, but all he received were downcast stares and anxious murmurings. The authority was on his side, and we all knew it. Finally, a squad car pulled up and two uniformed officers entered the bus. The first, Officer Mills, was a burly man with a gut that strained his belt. He carried an air of smug arrogance, as though he relished the power of his badge. The second, Officer Cunningham, was younger, with a face that betrayed uncertainty, maybe even a hint of reluctance. "All right, let's see what's going on here," Mills said, eyes scanning the bus. Blake practically shoved him in the direction of Rosa. "She won't move." He spat. "I told her to give up her seat. And she's sitting there, defying the law, refusing to follow the rules. Arrest her." I saw Cunningham cast a quick, uneasy glance at Rosa, then at Mills, who was obviously the senior officer. Mills turned to Rosa and said, "Ma'am, are you going to move? Or are we going to have to forcibly remove you?" Rosa lifted her gaze to meet his, voice still calm. "Officer, I'm not breaking any law that should stand. I paid my fare, and I'm just sitting where I'm allowed to. I won't move." Mills pressed his lips together, exhaling through his nose. "Don't make this difficult. Lady, I don't want to have to drag you out." A flicker of something, maybe pity, crossed his face, but it was quickly replaced by the stony visage of a man used to enforcing unjust laws. Rosa said, her voice catching slightly, "I've made my decision." Without further warning, Mills reached for her arm, but Rosa did not flail or resist. She simply stood, and at that moment, Officer Cunningham gently placed a hand on her other arm, guiding her toward the aisle. She allowed them to lead her off the bus. Yet, as they escorted her away, she paused and looked back over her shoulder, eyes scanning the bus. Her gaze lingered on me for the briefest moment. I felt a tear roll down my cheek, burning hot with shame, sorrow, and an unspoken promise that I would not forget what I had witnessed. Rosa, one of the black men who had given up his seat earlier, cried softly, "We're behind you." And though he didn't dare stand up in full defiance, the spirit of solidarity was there in his words, a message of support. Rosa gave him a nod of gratitude, and then she was gone, stepping off the bus and into the humid night air, flanked by the two policemen. James Blake heaved a sigh of triumph, as though he had vanquished a fierce opponent, but a flicker of nervous energy danced in his eyes, as if he suspected that this moment would escalate into something far larger than a single seat on a single bus. I remained frozen in place, wanting so desperately to follow, to speak up, to do anything that might help her, but that paralyzing terror kept me glued to my seat. Then, as the bus began to clear because Many black passengers decided they could no longer ride in peace after witnessing that injustice. I slowly gathered my purse and stepped onto the curb. I watched from a distance as Rosa stood beside the police car, her hands clasped together, her expression still dignified despite the predicament she was in. A small crowd had begun to form, and I heard murmurs of confusion, outrage, fear, and even misguided approval. "She's just asking for trouble," an older white man muttered. "Good riddance," another hissed. But there were others who seemed concerned, worried, scanning the scene as if uncertain whether they should intervene. In the midst of this chaos, I took a few hesitant steps closer, just enough to hear the conversation between Rosa and the officers. MAAM Officer Cunningham said in a subdued tone, "I'm sorry it has to be this way. I really don't want any trouble." He looked at Mills for reassurance, but Mills only grunted, fishing around in his pocket for a pair of handcuffs. Rosa took a steady breath and replied, "Trouble finds us all, sooner or later, when we stand for what's right." Mills stepped forward, cuffs in hand, and Rosa did not resist as he gently placed them on her wrists, though I could see her flinch at the cold metal. "I can walk myself," she insisted, and he nodded, perhaps showing a sliver of respect. They helped her into the back of the squad car, and as the door was about to close, Rosa leaned her head out and calmly addressed the gathering crowd. "I hope one day we'll all have the same rights. We can't keep living in fear of each other." The door slammed shut, and the squad car pulled away into the night, leaving a vacuum of shock and confusion behind. James Blake retreated to the bus, muttering curses about how he was running behind schedule, and the bystanders gradually dispersed, some shaking their heads, some smiling slyly as though entertained by the drama, and a few, like me, carrying that hollow ache of bearing witness to an injustice that defied logic and decency. It wasn't long before the news spread across town, stirring up whispers in barber shops, grocery stores, and churches. I overheard people discussing the arrest the very next day. Russell, my husband, read about it in the local paper with a scowl on his face, though I couldn't be sure if his anger was directed at Rosa's arrest or at the trouble it was sure to bring upon Montgomery. "Margaret," he said, eyes scanning the small article, "weren't you riding that same bus route?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I was," I replied, my voice trembling. Russell looked at me with concern. "You all right?" I wanted to confess everything. How I had witnessed the entire ordeal, how I had been close enough to support Rosa but had remained silent, how it haunted me in my dreams. But all I could bring myself to say was, "I'm fine." Just a bit shaken. "It wasn't right, Russell." He sighed, folding the paper. "I know it isn't right, but this is the way things are down here. Always has been." He placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, but I shook my head. Something inside me had changed that night, a spark of understanding that would no longer allow me to accept the status quo. Over the next few days, talk of organizing a boycott reached my ears. I heard that Ednixon, the head of the local NAACP, was furious about Rosa's arrest and determined to take action. I also heard the name of a young preacher, Martin Luther King Jr., who led the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, a man rumored to be a dynamic speaker and a passionate advocate for justice. Though I was not a member of any civil rights group, I felt compelled to do something, anything, to support Rosa in her stand. One morning, just days after the arrest, I gathered my courage and walked to the church basement where some of these meetings were taking place. I remember the trembling in my knees as I pushed open the door and saw a room full of solemn faces, men and women of color, some wearing neat Sunday suits, some in humble work clothes, but all bearing the determined glow of people on the cusp of a monumental cause. My presence drew a few puzzled glances, but one woman, elegantly dressed and exuding an air of quiet authority, approached me. "Hello, can I help you?" she asked gently. I felt my cheeks burn, but I forced myself to speak. "My name is Margaret Watson. I was on that bus when Mrs. Parks was arrested. I just wanted to see if there's anything I could do to help. Her eyes widened slightly. Is that so? Well, Margaret, you've come to the right place. My name is Joanne Robinson, and we're planning a boycott of the buses. We need volunteers, people willing to spread the word, drive folks who need rides, that sort of thing. But be warned, it's risky. I nodded, my heart pounding. I understand. I'm just tired of seeing good people treated like they're less than human. A soft smile graced her lips. Then you're with us. That's how I first became involved in the Montgomery Bus Boycott, albeit quietly and mostly from the periphery, since I was well aware of the potential danger to a white woman who openly defied the city's racist norms. But I did what I could. I passed out leaflets, discreetly offered rides to my neighbors who needed to get to work and refused to take the bus, and I donated the few spare dollars Russell and I could afford to help with the movement. All the while, Rosa's arrest weighed heavily on my mind. I learned that she had been released on bail and that she was scheduled for trial on December 5. One afternoon, as I was sorting through boxes of dot flyers, I encountered Dr. King himself, who quietly thanked me for my assistance and asked, "Were you really on the bus that night?" I nodded. "Yes, sir, I was. I saw the whole thing." She was so calm, so brave. He folded his hands, looking reflective. "Would you be willing to provide testimony, if needed, as a witness? It could help reinforce the truth of what happened." My heart pounded, torn between the fear of the consequences and the desire to do right. Yes, I would. I said quietly but firmly. "Then let's pray we won't have to," Dr. King replied, giving me a kind nod. "But your courage is noted, Margaret, thank you." When the trial arrived, I sat in the back of the courtroom, shoulders tense, heart hammering against my ribcage. The room was packed, with some reporters perched along the sides, notebooks in hand. Rosa Parks sat at the defense table, wearing a neat dress, hands folded in her lap, her composure once again unshaken. The prosecutor, a stiff-faced man named Gray, wasted no time painting Rosa as a troublemaker. "Your Honor," he declared, "this woman refused to obey the lawful directive of the bus driver. She disrupted the peace, inconvenienced other passengers, and violated the city ordinance that enforces segregation. She's guilty." Rosa's attorney, Fred Gray, no relation to the prosecutor, stood up and addressed the court. "Your Honor, this entire ordinance is unconstitutional. My client paid her fare. She has the right to sit, and she did not incite violence. She simply refused to give up her seat based on her race, a practice that is inherently unjust." The prosecutor rolled his eyes, while the judge, a man named John B. Scott, drummed his fingers on the desk, appearing impatient. "Let's keep this focused on the facts," he grumbled. "Did your client refuse to give her seat up when asked to move to the back of the bus?" "Yes, Your Honor," Fred Gray replied, "and that is precisely the point. The law that demands she move is an unjust law." The prosecutor offered a mocking laugh, turning to Rosa. "Miss S. Parks, do you deny refusing to vacate your seat?" She looked him in the eye. "I do not deny it, sir. I refuse to move because I believe we are all equal in the eyes of the law, or at least we should be." The tension in the courtroom was thick as molasses. I found myself silently praying that the judge would show some measure of fairness, though I knew the odds were slim. The judge exhaled sharply. "I find the defendant guilty of violating the city ordinance. She is to pay a fine of $10 plus court costs." A murmur rippled through the spectators. Rosa's expression remained solemn but resolute, as though she had expected nothing less. Outside the courthouse, a throng of supporters greeted her with claps and words of encouragement. I saw E.D. Nixon grip her hand and say, "Don't you worry, Rosa. This is just the beginning." She offered him a brave smile in return. Dr. King stepped forward to address the crowd gathered on the courthouse steps. "They may fine Mrs. Parks," he said, voice resonating with conviction, "but they cannot silence us. They cannot take away our dignity, and they cannot stop the march of justice that has begun here in Montgomery." Cheers erupted, but also there were bitter, angry stares from some white onlookers, and I knew that trouble might soon follow. A woman near me shook her fist and shouted, "Send them all back to the cotton fields." I felt a sickening lurch in my stomach at her hatred. The boycott that followed was a monumental endeavor, something I watched unfold over the next several months with equal parts pride and trepidation. The city's black community organized carpools, walked miles to work, sacrificed and suffered intimidation, yet refused to relent. Day after day, the buses ran nearly empty, crippling the transit company's revenue. Anger from the segregationists escalated. Men gathered on street corners, sneering and plotting, some calling for violent attacks on leaders of the boycott. My husband's co-workers whispered that he should keep me in line, insinuating that I was a traitor to my race. Even Russell, who loved me, sometimes begged me to keep my head down for fear that our home might be vandalized or worse. But each time I thought of Rosa Parks, her quiet resolve, and the flash of pain and determination in her eyes, I remembered why I had gotten involved in the first place. One cold morning near Christmas, my old farm truck rattled up beside a small group of women waiting by the side of the road. They were dressed in old coats, ready to walk miles to their jobs as maids in the wealthy part of town. I recognized one of them from the church basement. "Hop in," I told them. They hesitated for just a second before climbing onto the back. We traveled for nearly 30 minutes, and during that time, they sang songs of hope and faith, their voices rising above the rattling engine. I felt tears sting my eyes. It was in those small moments of unity that I realized the power of what Rosa had sparked. Meanwhile, Rosa herself faced backlash on all sides. The bus company circulated rumors about her. Hateful pamphlets appeared on street corners. She lost her job at the department store. And her husband, Raymond, faced harassment and intimidation at his own workplace. Still, she pressed forward, joining with Dr. King and other civil rights leaders to keep the boycott alive. One afternoon, rumors flew that Rosa would be speaking at a rally at Holt Street Baptist Church, so I summoned my courage once more and slipped inside with the throngs of attendees. The air was electrified, men and women fanning themselves with paper programs, children squirming beside their parents, a sense of unstoppable momentum coursing through every pew. When Rosa stood to speak, a hush fell over the congregation. "I'm not a political figure," she began, voice soft but steady. "I'm just an ordinary person who saw an opportunity to stand up for what is right. If they think they can scare me into submission, they're mistaken. And if they think they can scare you, they are wrong. Together, we are a force they cannot ignore." Thunderous applause shook the rafters. My heart soared with admiration, and I swore to myself that no matter how frightened I was, I would not remain silent again if push came to shove. After the rally, I waited in line with a few others to shake her hand, my pulse fluttering. When it was my turn, she recognized me immediately and said in a gentle tone, "You were on the bus that night." I nodded, tears brimming in my eyes. "Yes, Mrs. Parks, I'm so sorry I didn't do anything to help." She gave my hands a reassuring squeeze. "You're helping now, and that's what matters. Thank you for being here. Don't ever think your contribution is too small." I left the church with my head held high, resolved to do more. But times grew darker before they grew brighter. Dr. King's home was bombed in late January, sending shockwaves of terror through the community. Crosses were burned on lawns. Threatening phone calls in the middle of the night became all too common. I found myself jumping at every shadow, every sudden noise outside my window. My husband paced the living room each evening, cursing the day we got involved, but never once telling me I had to stop. He knew my conscience wouldn't allow it. Finally, after more than a year of boycotting 382 days, to be exact, the Supreme Court ruled that bus segregation was unconstitutional. News of that victory spread like wildfire, elation and relief mingling in the streets of Montgomery. We embraced one another, crying tears of joy, aware that the struggle was far from over, but that a momentous battle had been won. The buses were officially desegregated on December 21.1956, and I recall that day vividly. Rosa Parks and Dr. King rode at the front of the bus, a crowd of supporters cheering them on from the sidewalks. I stood among them, clapping so hard my palms stung, beaming through tear-blurred vision. Rosa's expression was serene, yet triumphant, as though she understood that this was a major milestone, but only the beginning of a much longer journey. In the years that followed, I tried to carry on with my life, raising a family, working odd jobs, but I never forgot that night. I never forgot Rosa's unwavering stand and the fierce storm of hatred and bravery it unleashed. And yet there was one moment in particular, a moment that occurred just a few weeks after her arrest, which hardly anyone knows about. One evening, I mustered my courage and decided to visit Rosa at her home, wanting to offer whatever moral support I could. She lived in a modest brick house, the paint chipping on the trim, a small porch out front with a single rocking chair. I knocked softly, half hoping she wouldn't be home, because I was so nervous. But the door swung open, and there she stood, her face lighting up with polite surprise. "Margaret," she said, kindly, "come in, please." I stepped inside, my heart hammering as I surveyed the humble living room, a small couch, a few wooden chairs, a worn rug. She led me to the couch, offering me a glass of sweet tea. "I know we don't know each other well," I stammered, gripping the glass with clammy hands, "but I had to tell you in person how brave I think you are. I was so close that night, close enough to speak up, but I froze. I'm sorry." Rosa set her glass down, looking thoughtful. "Margaret, you had no obligation to protect me, but I appreciate your honesty. It's never too late to stand up for what's right." I swallowed hard. "I just wanted you to know. If there's ever anything I can do," she gently interrupted me. "You're doing it now, by telling me, by being here. You're crossing a line that many people don't dare to cross." I blinked, unsure how to respond. She sighed and continued, "A lot of folks think I refused to move just because I was physically tired. That's part of it. I'd been on my feet all day, but mostly I was tired of giving in, tired of being treated as though my life, my comfort, my rights didn't matter." "That kind of tired goes deeper than your feet." I nodded, tears threatening to spill. "I'll never understand what you've been through, but I want to help. I don't want to be a silent bystander anymore." Rosa placed a hand over mine, her warmth and calm radiating. "Then we welcome you as an ally. This fight belongs to everyone who believes in justice." We sat for a while longer, talking about our backgrounds, our families, our hopes. She admitted that she was afraid sometimes, particularly at night, when phone calls threatened her safety. But she found solace in her faith and in the knowledge that the movement was growing daily. I left her home feeling both humbled and inspired, carrying a new sense of purpose that fueled my actions through the boycott and beyond. Over the years, Rosa and I crossed paths sporadically at events, marches, or gatherings, each time exchanging a warm nod or a few words of greeting. I never became a famous activist or a public figure, but I supported the civil rights movement from the sidelines, carrying memories of that December night like a talisman, reminding me that change often starts with one small act of defiance. Yet, there was always the lingering guilt of knowing that I could have done more in that moment, could have spoken up directly to James Blake or to the officers. That guilt haunted me for a long time. Even though Rosa herself never made me feel responsible for her plight, I often replayed the scene in my mind, imagining myself standing up, shouting, "No, this isn't right," but in reality, I had only managed a faint, trembling whisper and a gentle touch on her shoulder. Now, all these decades later, with the perspective of age and experience, I realize that history is shaped not just by the heroic few who stand front and center, but also by the countless others who witness and remember, who quietly support the cause, who pass on the stories so that future generations will know the true cost of freedom. My small role in that pivotal night and the subsequent movement is part of the broader tapestry of progress that Rosa Parks helped weave. I regret my silence in the moment of crisis, but I also cherish the lesson it taught me that complicity and fear can be as oppressive as the injustice itself, and that each of us has a responsibility to speak out, however daunting that may be. So here I am, at long last, sharing the unknown details of that arrest, the private words exchanged, the tense silences, the conflicting emotions tearing at everyone's hearts, and the moral awakening that came for me personally. Rosa Parks didn't raise her voice, didn't hurl insults or threats. She simply refused to be treated as less than a full human being. It was that quiet determination that shook an entire city, ultimately rocked the nation, and forever changed the course of history. Now, as I prepare to close this long, hidden chapter of my life, I want you to picture the bus on that December evening, the dingy seats, the worn windows fogged by human breath, the overhead lights flickering against the darkening sky, and in the midst of it all, a woman sitting calmly, holding her purse, refusing to budge even as fury and indignation swirled around her. Picture her measured words number, "I'm not moving," and the stunned silence that followed, the hush of an entire bus, suspended in a moment that transcended time and place. And then see her guided off that bus by two officers, head held high, the night air thick with tension and possibility. If you can picture that, then maybe you can understand why the eyewitness account matters, why we must preserve every detail, every nuance, every raw emotion, because in those small, seemingly insignificant moments, entire movements are born. In one courageous refusal, centuries of oppression are challenged. And in one quiet voice, the future is rewritten. That is what Rosa Parks did. And I was there, close enough to touch her shoulder, to witness the remarkable power of an ordinary woman making a stand that changed the world. I've carried this story for so long, weighed down by the memory of my own inaction, but also buoyed by the reminder that real change is possible, that it can start with one seat on a bus, one steady voice saying, "Enough." And I hope that by sharing every word spoken in that cramped, tense, sweat-soaked ride, by revealing the fear and the courage, the wrath and the hope, we might honor not just the legend that Rosa became, but the human being she was, the flesh and blood person who chose to remain seated despite every threat and warning, and in doing so stood taller than any of us could have imagined. That is what happened that night, as I saw it. The unknown details finally laid bare, and I pray that you, dear reader, will hold them close and remember that heroic acts do not always roar. Sometimes they whisper, and in that whisper, the world can be set ablaze with the fire of justice and the irresistible demand for freedom for all.